Hey guys, Drew here, and thanks so much for stopping by and checking out this episode of The Edge. Are you interested in video game development and production? Or maybe virtual reality and education is more your thing? Well, in this episode with Mark Nausha, Brad and I cover all of those topics and many in between. So you're not going to want to miss any of this content. Speaking of that, make sure that you go and like, subscribe, and sign up for notifications on our channel so that you don't miss out on any future content that we deliver here. Now, down in the comment section, let us know what your favorite video game title is that you play consistently, whether by yourself or with a group of friends. And at the end of the video, I'll let you know what mine is. Now, let's jump in to the interview. Welcome, everyone, to The Edge, a TMG Core production. I'm Drew Knoll.
And I'm Brad Furnish.
And today we have a special guest with us, a close friend of TMG Core, Mr. Mark Nausha. Mark is a noted game developer, online community builder, entrepreneur, former deputy director of the Game Lab at SMU Guildhall. He has shipped more than 70 titles commercially in the video game industry, generating billions of dollars in revenue. Mark is currently president of Abacus 3, which specializes in esports experiences through sponsorship, events, arena builds, and curriculum with the goals of sustainability and growth for their clients. Mark, thanks so much for being on this morning.
Drew, Brad, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Mark, one of the things that we ask all of our guests on the show is a bit of an icebreaker. If you could just briefly describe an unexpected event in your career, whether that's a positive event or, more of what we'd call a character building moment. Doesn't have to be totally in depth or, real in depth, just kind of a little nugget, if you will, for our listeners.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The first thing that comes to mind, there's a lot, but I'd say towards the latter half of my game development career, got asked to guest lecture at SMU. And I went up there and I just was thinking, hey, I'm just going to talk to the kids and see how this goes. And talking to students afterwards literally changed trajectory of my career. I was like, I could really get into this. I could really start teaching. I would really love it, really enjoy it. So it was unintended consequence, and then just totally changed the direction of where I was going with my life.
Oh, that's really cool. What if you could? What was it about that experience that really impacted you in such a way that completely altered the course of your career?
Yeah, I think. I just think we're all very passionate in game development, but I think to see passion in students in a way I had not seen really touched me deeply. And and not just the passion, but just the eagerness to learn and just like literally sucking as much information out of your head like a sponge that they possibly could. And it not egotistically said at all. It was just like, wow, you have great conversations and great learn moments in your career and while you're, on the creative side building games. But this was different. And they weren't looking at you like a fanboy. I mean, sometimes that happens, or a fangirl. But this was really just a keen knowledge to learn and get better at their craft, which, like I said, you see in the professional world, but this was just very inspiring, very invigorating to give back to that. And even in those brief moments that lasted post the lecture, just talking to students for about, what was an hour, but went by for me like 5 minutes of time. Each one of those just reinvigorated me. And I wasn't losing passion. It was nothing like that. It was just like, wow, I could really have an impact in people's lives. That's very different from what I've done in the past.
Yeah, no, that sounds cool. It's interesting you say that it wasn't like your passion was waning. It's just you had a passion directed in a different space, and it was it's interesting because I think we all have those moments in our lives, right? Whether it's it could be any litany of things that provide that spark, whether in a different direction for us. And I think, and I'm by no means want to make this about me, but my career is a pretty hard, like if you just go look at my LinkedIn alone, right? I've had some hard lefts in my career, from
working as a youth pastor a long time ago to mental health as a, licensed professional counselor. And now I'm a sales executive in a tech startup company.
Yeah.
But like you said, it's those passion points that touch you and something, pulls you. So that's really cool that you had that experience and more so that you followed through with it. Cause I think a lot of people have those experiences and it's like, nope, that's not my lane. That's not, I know this over here and I'm going to stay here cause it's comfortable.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you kind of got out of the box and really started taking your career in different directions because of that experience.
Oh, for sure. And I don't want to say it's a pay it forward thing, but it almost feels like it because you think all those people that had a profound impact in your life at some point in your career, and I still do. Like I have mentors around me constantly. And then I think to be a mentor to others, I think just rounds you out. It just makes you a much better person. And no matter what you're doing, I don't want to get preachy here, but you can always take all those life lessons. And especially when you're in those relationships, just apply it, right?
Yeah,
Whether
yeah.
you come from youth pastor or, psychology or counseling or whatever the case may be, those can just profoundly make you better, I think,
Sure.
in your
Yeah.
career, and even at home. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. I mean, I agree. For me, it's one of those fun things where, from a psychology perspective, a lot of people like to stay in their comfort zone, and like you have to push out and, that's the only way that you grow and kind of go from there. But to hit on some of that, I don't know a whole lot about the gaming development process. Sure. So you can educate me. How about that?
Yeah. I think the thing I always say, and it is, and even you guys doing what you do at team, it's very much a team sport. And you're working with so many different people on so many facets of a game. So there's, just at a very high level for people to understand it, you have programming, you have design, you have art, and then you have like production management that sits in and around it. And I'm not saying it's all that way, but I'd say the majority of game development is like that. So, you'll hear me say it's a very passionate thing. And passion is great. And then, passion can be negative as well. You can find yourself lost in it for long periods of time. So you find, yourself getting out of balance. But, it is a business at the end of the day. So the one thing that rubs there in a good way is you have budgets and schedules and timelines. And some of these projects are pretty heavily invested. Some run $100 million to $200 million projects, just like film or more. And they run the course of a year or two or longer in some cases. And then there's shorter ones and everything in between. But at the end of the day, there's a rub between that creative process and creative decisions versus you have to be mindful of budgets and schedules and things like that. And at the end of the day, everybody wants to make something high quality. And at the end of the day, you're thinking of that user and affecting them in a very profound way. So all to be said, it's a team sport. There's a lot of great technical aspects and hardware changing, and you're always pushing the envelope. And I think that's what makes it so interesting and fascinating is it, for most of us, I would say, I don't want to speak for all of us, but most of us, it's always changing to some degree. And you're always pushing the envelope. So it's not static, and it's ever evolving. And we do a process in it, not to make a process driven thing, but it's a lot of us use agile development methodologies, and I could speak a lot on a lot of these different things, but agile, for people that don't know what that is, you're always iterating within milestones, and you're always iterating to get better from milestone to milestone to milestone. And really, at its heart is fail fast, as we say, learn from it, and then use what's working and learn from that's not. That will change continually over whether your project's 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years. But I love that. And I'd say all of us in game dev, we either found it or it found us, and don't know what we would be doing if we weren't doing game development.
So to that end, how did you get into it, Mark? I know if from some of our conversation, I mean, you started out in California, right?
Yeah, so
and
I'm born and raised
Texas?
California.
Okay.
My heart's there still, but I love Texas, and now I got different passions out here in Texas. But from my background was electrical engineering business, and coming out of college, I was like, I'm not going to fake it. Like I didn't know what I was going to do with all that. So like you got business, entrepreneur, and EE and computer science background and a lot of math. And it's an interesting question. So when I first came out, I actually was working, doing fabrication, anodizing, and trying to find different techniques way back when, how to do like color anodize and all these different things. And it was awesome, but not very fulfilling. And so I never saw myself as running like a warehouse and, people doing anodizing and all these kind of interesting projects, but not my thing. And I was a heavy gamer, and my friends that knew me knew like I was getting a little stale in that. Or not fulfilled. I wouldn't say stale, not fulfilled. And there was a little developer, game developer, not far from where I was. And I had good management skills and creativity, decent technical chops. And then this small little developer, wasn't, half hour from where I was working, was like, you should go interview there. And I didn't know anything about game development. I knew nothing about building games. I just knew I love games. And so to date myself, this was like late 80s, early 90s. And, the game development was it was a lot like esports now. It was like the wild, wild west. So I went there and I started talking about these things I was doing more on like a scientific chemical background for like what I was doing in anodizing and fabrication. And there was creativity of that, and there was similar processes. And so the owners that I was talking to, I found myself talking about more about that than game development, my passion for games, even though they got that from me quickly. And it was that, my prior experience, that brought me in, and they needed someone to manage their projects, guide their projects, and deliver them on time and on budget, which is always the thing, and high quality. Everybody wants everything. And it was very, very random how I got into it. I'm very fortunate, very blessed, actually, that happened. Wasn't planned. I could tell you clearly that wasn't planned. And then I got into it, and I never looked back. And it a lot of emotion behind what I'll say next. It changed me immensely, in the sense that it was fulfilling on so many levels to work with people that are just brilliant, and then to create things just out of your head and then deliver them. And then reach a lot of people that you would never anticipate in reaching, millions of people through your products. I could talk all day, but I got like goose chills right now talking about it. And that was a long time ago. But still, that same drive, that same passion, and how the industry's evolved and changed so much. It doesn't even look the same as that era I was talking about, whereas like garage band time, whereas 4 or 5 of us building these crazy games. But it's still there, and now there's like different challenges, new challenges, in and around gaming, in and around esports, the way we consume it, the way we watch it, is ever evolving and ever changing. So, but anyways, long-winded. That's how I got there.
No, that's great. And I'm interested in, and we don't have to get like super major in the weeds, but just kind of what that You kind of outline there's programming and there's production and all of that goes into it. But if you could, and I don't know if you can from an NDA perspective
Sure.
or whatever, but if you like from the kernel seed of an idea of a game, and maybe you could use a specific game that you developed to help from a context standpoint, but somebody has an idea for a game. How do you go from that to now I'm playing it on whatever platform, whether it's my Sega Genesis or my N64 or my PS4 or whatever?
Yeah. So I'd say it's a lot different now than it was then, and have, done everything in between, so to speak. So I would, the way I explained it to a lot of people, we were, I would say late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s, we were creating genres that had not been exposed yet. The concept of first person shooter to all these common terms we have today, no one knew what that was, to be honest with you. So there was a lot more freedom and flexibility of experimenting, and really based around different types of game experiences than today. So I'm going to kind of explain it both ways. Back then it was like, wow, haven't seen that before. And very little focus testing or user testing back then. It was very instinctive, very gut design, both from marketing sales standpoint to the creative standpoint. I won't say that was everywhere, but that was in a lot of places, a lot of big places, Sony, Sega, you name it, Nintendo. We were all very experimental. So as long as you showed, kind of the development of an idea, you didn't have to really show proof of concepts or prototypes. Like no one's going to do anything now without actually kind of feeling it, touching it, seeing it, right? And that was kind of the Wild West then. Now, we have a lot of franchises, we have a lot of investment. You see a lot of sequels, at least on the PC and the console side. I would say mobile still feels a lot like what I was describing in the past, where you can try and experiment with new and different things on mobile. You still can on the other platforms, but I would say, candidly, it's probably a little harder. So original IP now, maybe character development, maybe different environments, things we haven't seen. That excites me. You see a little less of it because obviously so much large money is invested in this stuff now, and expectation to deliver is, you want to pull the risk out of that. I get it. So now it's, you got to show a prototype if you're doing something new. You even have to show a prototype if you're showing the next sequel of, whatever it may be that you all plan now. But there's a process to it. And it's more scientific than you would think. You gotta, show that you can if you're doing something new, that the technical challenges are addressed, because people don't want to invest in new tech and a new IP. And I'm talking primarily around new ideas and new IP even today's climate. So you want to minimize that risk. You want, whether you're doing it for a publisher and you're investing yourself or have large investment into these things, you need to prove that out for success. And then I would say on top of that, as you're developing and during development, when it's appropriate, user research, not for everybody, for a lot of companies, is becoming part of the process. So you're eliminating the risk involved, or user research is giving you information of how your design is not working as intended, is the best way to describe it. Not that it's telling you how to design, it's just telling you where your design can be improved, is working, or needs improvement. So, like I said, earlier, I think in the past it was, easy to throw more things at the wall and see what sticks, versus now where, it's a highly evolved industry with a lot of money and great expectations to, under promise, over deliver. And,
Right.
it's a little bit harder now, I would say. development's easier as far as all the tools and technology we have, because before it was not as robust, and you would have to create quite a bit of technology. Where now, I won't say it's easy on developers, but I would say it's easier, because you have so much at your disposal.
To that point, Mark, I know you said you were working specifically on genres at the time, and obviously there's a process and you're just throwing some stuff out there and seeing what stuff. Was there a particular genre that you enjoyed developing more for, or like got more excited about? That passion that you mentioned.
It's going to sound weird. What I enjoyed developing for or creating might not necessarily be what I enjoy playing. And at other times, what I enjoy playing is what I enjoy developing. At the time I was arcades were still very big, but they were coming into the homes through console. So we were trying to enhance the experience of what everybody was used to dropping coins into. Is now you got to develop a little bit different as you go to homes, and everybody's just kind of translating arcade machines to the home. But at the time, fighting games were really big. They were super big. Enjoyed playing them. Still enjoy playing them. And I grew up in the arcades as a kid, and so to see some of the fighting games come together was awesome. And so one of the biggest games, whether people know it or not, it was a big game for me, because back then it was the first game that sold 1 million units for me, which back then was large. And so we did this game called Eternal Champions, and, Mortal Kombat had just, was really the thing back then. And so was Street Fighter. And so Sega came, we were a developer for Sega, we were a division of Sega. And they're like, yeah, we're going to go beat Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat. And I don't even know the analogy to give you guys. It's just crazy. It's like being last in the NFL one year and they're like, go beat the Patriots next year or something. You're like, sure.
Right. Yeah.
You want to, you think you can. And we gave it a good shot. It was, by today's standards, it's nothing as far as like violence or anything. And I'm not condoning violence, but back then for what we were doing, and Mortal Kombat was pretty violent for its time. And we had some things, overkills and things of that nature. And, we ended up on the Senate floor before it was released because everybody's losing their minds on, that's so violent. It was cartoony, blah, blah, blah. And, I always say, any PR is good PR, and it was actually. And the game still has somewhat of a following. Once in a while, I'll get a call, and they're like, "Hey, we want to do an interview on Eternal Champion." I'm almost like, "What was Eternal Champion?" It was so long ago. But to your point, I really enjoyed making that game, and then you also really appreciate, not from a user, just how much goes into it. How much goes into we were very limited on memories. So like animations of the characters were so reduced, and this may not be exciting for people out there, but I know on the development side, we had to get super creative on our memory use, and then backgrounds, animations, and everything else that goes into a game, sound effects, blah, blah, blah. But, I really enjoyed it. Now, on the other hand, I made a lot of sports games, and I am a sports fan, but I'm not the biggest fan of playing sports games. But I really, I did like making them. We got to work with some great license, NFL, MLB, and did a lot of games in that genre. So yeah, and then did some basketball games on some handheld devices and things like that. Now, I really like making those games, and I really enjoyed, meeting different athletes, celebrities in that space. And that was awesome. But again, I like playing a lot of different games. Sports games is not my funnest thing to play, but I like making them. So it's really kind of that juxtaposition. But that, anything you make, you want to learn the competition and you want to be better than. So you start playing those games, I would say, more as a job And a lot of people will tell you that, you know, when you make games, you're playing your own game and you're playing the competition. I'm a big fan of know your competition better than your own game. So you're not repeating things or repeating bad things, or maybe you want to emulate good things, but you want to make it better than. And that's why I say that. So I had to play just about every sporting game on the planet, but not necessarily what I would play in my spare time.
No, that makes sense. How did you go? I'm just curious because, and having no context or understanding from that piece of it, I like it, or I think in my head, is it one of those things where once you got established as a developer, and I know you went through a part of your career, were you getting game ideas pitched at you, like in the sense of, like, you know, book publishers or record labels getting demos or whatever? Did you get that? And if so, like, how did you go through going, well, this is a really awesome idea. We're going to just file this over here and hopefully nobody brings it up again? Or how did you go through that process?
Yeah. So I've been on both sides of it. What I mean by that is you can be like an independent developer or a development studio within a large publisher, and you're creating the content. Now at publishing houses like Sony and Electronic Arts, Blizzard, Blizzard's more of a developer publisher, even though they've merged with Activision. So I've been on the publishing side. That's the way I will say it. And you're seeing prototypes, game designs. At least this is a little while back, but all the time was taking a look at that. And then you've got to evaluate. I would say when you're in a position of decision-making like that, for me personally, that was a lot more intimidating, a lot more scary, because it was kind of your butt on the line. Like, you're the one that decided that we should go make this type of game, right? And you have that ability a bit when you're making them as well, if you're part of like executive producer team and stuff like that, which I've been at. But when you're just, I'm going to go publish these types of games, or we're going to go invest these types of games, and you're looking at a lot of new content, it's intimidating. Now they end up, you know, hopefully well, and other times they do not. And they're, even to this day, I'd say a little bit less on the pitching new ideas, at least to the bigger publishers. Now, you know, like I said, there's other places like mobile and VR and AR and things like that where they're looking at a lot of different ideas. But yeah, I've been in that. And you're looking at so much, and you're trying to glean out, like, what is the next big thing, especially when you're going to invest in something new. That's not sequel driven or franchise driven, or you're looking at licenses being thrown at you, and they're saying, hey, let's go make a game in around this license, or let's apply this license to this type of genre. Yeah, I would say, if I look at my career, I'd probably say 85% was development. 10 to 15% of my part of my career was evaluate product, invest in product, go publish product. But I really did that more as a learn, because I wanted to learn the industry much more broader, because I took that type of learning mentality when I, you know, started my own studios, to know, you know, how does the publisher think? How do they look at product? Not just through a developer's eyes, but through the publishing side. So when I did that, it's more the attitude I have from my whole life is when I go, you know, nothing's a job to me. It's all like career moves. So I just looked at it as part of the educational process when I did that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Was it more of a gut thing, or did you have a process that you used to evaluate, or and maybe you could speak to a broader, if there is some sort of an industry standard or consistent processes that you know of, you know, that people use, and is there technology that's coming to play in part of that process of how they evaluate, like, okay, we're pitched this idea, we're going to do that because we think it's a good idea because.
Yeah. So it's evolved. I mean, there's lots of ways to evaluate product prior, or even like now, like if you're trying a new feature, in I would say more of the big franchises. There's ways to test that before it goes out. You can test it way before you get to a closed beta or anything like that. And I won't say there's a one size fit all, but people do really good jobs on user research, product placement where it fits, competitive landscape, which are typical things that most businesses do, no matter if you're gaming or not, right? And so I would say the more highly evolved, and I don't mean just like intellectually, I mean just business-wise evolved, where we've started to adopt so many of the practices that were already there in other industries, and we've just adopted them in. So, the gut instinct stuff is, I think, gone by the wayside, in my opinion. There's a lot of people that design that way where they think, they know the users, they know it better kind of thing. But I'd say most companies like to test that. And it's all about risk management, right? Like
that's what I was going to say. Yeah, you need to have something to back yourself up if you make a decision to.
Well, or you'll come up with an idea or, even a new game, and they'll point out possibly, and you want people to poke holes into it, and they'll be like, well, that didn't work in this game. Or, you try to relate things. It's not all apples to apples, but when you can, like you said, you substantiate it or you're disproving it, right? So I would say it's a lot more scientific. Everybody's got, similar methodologies, but like I said, it's what they're confident with using. So again, that's why I think we've seen ourselves evolve towards, a lot of like what the movie industry's done, which is, sequel hits driven, drives the industry. But there's places to experiment.
Sure. And I think, and I don't want to spend our whole time on game development, but I'm curious from a psychological standpoint. You and I have had some offline conversations around this, and it just interests me, and I think it's a timely as well as kind of an age-old topic of addiction around games. Mm-hmm. And obviously, and there's a fine line and probably a gray line there of in any product that you develop, whether it's a game or anything else, a car or whatever, you want to build that brand affinity, right? So you want people to constantly use your product, and and whenever you put out a new one, they're loyal to your brand, so they're going to buy the new thing you put out. I think I think Brad and I are probably would be casual gamers probably at best. So, we probably don't fit in that mold of people that are, well, I hope I don't, of an addict, right? And even using that word, there's a stigma around that, right, of being a gaming addict. But it exists, right? And even so, to the point where now addiction, a sub diagnosis in the DSM-5 is gaming, right? So it's a thing. It's not something we can ignore. And I'm not trying to by no means rail on gaming because it's an addictive thing. I mean, everything's addictive, from your Cheetos to your Dr. Pepper to Call of Duty, right? And it's a personal, responsibility thing. But I'm curious, do gamers, and this has probably evolved as well, do you design that addiction into the game? And how so? And obviously there's a lot of ethical things to tie in there. Like, how does, from your perspective, how does that play in the space?
So I'd say early in my career, I never thought about it. I'll be real candid with you, and I don't think many of us thought about it. And that's being extremely honest. And I think most people, especially developers, who's been around as long as me, I would say that's probably one thing that's probably consistent, is we didn't think of that. And obviously coming from a different era back then. However, I would say it's not like, we're looking for, how to fit addiction in and whatever term you want to use. I would say by nature, great game design can be addictive. So you get into this, and I've taught ethics around gaming, and we always talk about this. And my attitude towards it is you gotta kind of know where you fit in it and how you're going to respond to it. Now, do we go out and maliciously try to addict people? I would hope not. Do some. I'm sure they do. And, that can drive revenue to a point. Now, I would still argue that's not great game design. If the sole motivation is to unintentionally or intentionally addict people just so they're like going to do loot boxes like it's some sort of lottery hit, right? Like there are some games that do those things. Now, can they stick around? Maybe, but I would say probably not. The other side of this coin is, if you want to like limit people's behavior, I don't know if good game design can limit people's play, so to speak. I mean, parents can. You can, as far as their children. And then you get into this whole deep conversation of, social responsibility. And do we as developers have social responsibility? We're very aware our games can be addictive. I think there are addictive people. And I think people can play these things in balance and self, discipline.
Right. Absolutely.
Here's my whole thing in this. Sorry, I'm not trying to mealy mouth at all. I think it is where do you fit in it, and what is your role in it, and what responsibility do we have in it, right? And everybody's got kind of their own slant or bend on it. And that's really when these conversations come up, when we speak, especially developers or upcoming developers, and we're training them, I'm more about like, how are you personally going to respond to someone that gets addicted to your game? So I'll make it very real with an anecdotal story. Now, I worked on, I ran development at Sony Online for a little while, not all of it, but I had EverQuest 2, and some other MMOs that fell under my leadership. And, we worked on those, and, I would get emails, and they were asking us like, when's the next next update or patch? And a lot of these people were like scheduling their vacations at work around the launch. And, I get that now, but in the heat of it, at first I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. They're trying to schedule their vacation around time to play. And, then I sat there for a minute, little in the recesses of my mind. I was like, wow, this is interesting. Like, this is very profound for people playing. And I get it because I game and play myself, and, I can get lost in it. But then you start to think, I'm not going to make a less qualitative game. You got to realize that people can't get addicted to your game. And, people do things on, giving out money to certain foundations that help people and such. And, if that's what you want to do and you have the fiduciary wherewithal as a company, I think those things are admirable. But, I'll say it this way to people that don't understand game design. We know the type of games you like to play, and we know you as a user, and we want to reward you and continually reward you for that thing you like to do. And I say that in the most positive way, because we want you to play our games, right? And if you think about that mental trigger, it's the same thing as, and I'm not equating gaming to any of this. I'm just saying your body's going to respond the same way to maybe a food you eat and other things that may be good for you or could be not good for you, like, alcohol in excess or whatever the case may be, or drugs or whatever people get addicted to. And again, I'm not equating gaming to any of those. I'm just saying your body, your mind will react for something. If you really enjoy it and you're continually getting rewarded, you fall, that's a dopamine.
It's a dopamine cycle.
Yeah, it's a dopamine
exactly.
cycle. Exactly. But again, I don't want to speak for the whole community, but, I think most people are generally pretty good people as far as the industry is concerned. And, there's people that could take advantage of that to some degree. But at the end of the day, you need a very good game to become addictive, in my opinion. I mean, people don't get addicted to things they don't like. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where, I'm sitting here thinking of it going, yes, there's responsibility of, you can't maliciously go after people. It's that piece of it, but it puts game developers in a tough spot because, in order for the game to be mass adopted, it has to be enjoyable, and people want to seek out that pleasure. And so you can't, to your point, make a less quality game. But, at the same time, that's what's going on at, Hershey's or Dr. Pepper, all these different places is, they're developing new products that they want to hit that same pleasure experience for, the user. So they actually buy more of it, consume more of it. And, to me, the neat part about gaming is there's so many different games out there. You mentioned that you like to play fighting games. Obviously, a lot of people like to play those games, whereas some sports games, not everybody picks up sports games. And even within sports games, you have people who are only going to go pick up Madden. People aren't going to necessarily pick up Major League Baseball. And, to that point, it's, to me, we've all kind of been there as you find yourself playing a video game and you look up and it's 2 hours later and you're like, oh crap, I didn't even realize that I've been playing this for 2 hours.
Exactly.
And I think that's where, in my opinion, and you could speak way more to this than I could, is, a developer can be cognizant of, if there's a certain level in a game, how long should that level take you? What are some of the break points to even give somebody pause or a break? But, from an overall addiction perspective, you guys are in kind of a tough spot when you have to make a game that gets, people wanting to play it.
Yeah. I think if you're doing it out of malice or, and if you have intentionality, and that it's really hard to prove intentionality, right? But like I said, most of the people I've been around and most of the great designers I've been around, we're looking to entertain people. We're looking to bring people together now, especially with online, build communities. And I'm not dismissive of the addiction, but I have seen in my career extensively so many more positives through gaming than negatives. Now we can always improve and be mindful on the negatives and whatever those things are. But as for I've had so many people come to me like, and it's the most humbling thing. It's like, your game changed me, or playing within this community, I didn't have a place to go. And this community brought me together, and I'm not deflecting at all. I'm just I've had so many of those conversations, and not just myself, people way more successful than I in the gaming industry, or you're just constantly humbled by the profound impact you've had. And then games can be used for good as well. Not just entertainment, but educating. There's some games now like, there's the whole fold-it process and other things that are solving medical problems. Now, I bring that up primarily because, when we go down the addiction road, and we do need to be mindful of addiction, the other thing I'll always caveat it with is there are probably exponentially more positive. Now, I don't want to see anyone die or ruin themselves or relationships get destroyed because I've been in those conversations. There have been MMOs where, people have sat in internet cafes, not in this country, in other countries, and, lost track of time and stopped eating, drinking, and just played. And, we've had some really, we've heard of some bad things, right? Or someone's played so much they've lost a partner or a marriage or things of that nature. Now, I still, we all got a role in this. And then it comes down to accountability and responsibility and things of those nature. So when I'm in ethics and I'm teaching to students, it's more, I'm not telling people do this or do that. I'm just saying reflect on the things you can control. And, you know, you're getting into an industry where this stuff is highly entertaining, highly evolved and can be addicting for some. And just be aware that you're going into that space. And then again, like I said earlier, and it's repetitive, is where are you in that? And are you, you know, maybe there's something you can do. Maybe there's someone you know that is addicted and you could help them. And, you know, I've had students, and I'll keep it very anonymous, where, you know, they were very candid with me in college that, you know, they were playing far too much. And I'd say as you develop games, you're probably playing not as much as you want because you're making games. But, you know, I've run into that, and we've had those conversations, you know. And I can be very candid myself. Even during college, you know, would play in the arcades quite a bit because that was my choice. And, you know, GPAs were 1-to-1, you know, going down.
Right. Well, and I think too, a lot of it, just from my perspective, and, you know, Brad and I both have younger kids. I think part of why gaming gets such a bad rap from the addiction standpoint is the culture that you're creating. And not that the culture is a bad thing, but that there is this entire culture around gaming. And I think a lot of people, one, it's more higher profile, right? I mean, because the reality of it is there are, this is massive speculation, so anybody that's listening to this, take that for what it is. But in my experience as a mental health professional, with teenagers, I saw way more addictions to pornography, to food, to alcohol and drugs than I did with addictions to video games and gaming. But those other addictions were much more wide, and I say accepted, but like the parents, like I would have parents that would bring me kids that had an eating addiction or, you know, an eating disorder, and they were concerned for their kid, no doubt. But it was like, okay, you know, Johnny's got, you know, an eating disorder. Let's work on that. They never blamed the food, right? They always, it was Johnny's problem. It was our problem as a family. Right. We're going to work through this together. But when they would bring, you know, when I would have a kiddo come in and their parents would bring them to me for a gaming, addiction, it was, well, that dang video game is just making Johnny addicted. And I'm like, no, guys, it's the same. Like, the video game is the same as the food, as the drug, as the alcohol. To your point, it's all about personal responsibility. And I find it interesting that gaming takes it on the chin so much more. And maybe it's because it's newer, you know, from the standpoint of, you know, like McDonald's doesn't take it in the shorts because, you know, people are addicted to cheeseburgers and French fries, but you know, our country's so much more obese than it is addicted to video games. Yeah. Right. So to your point, you know, I agree. It's at the end of the day, it is a personal responsibility thing for each individual. And you know, and especially with kids, it's if my 7-year-old gets addicted to video games, that's my fault as his parent, not Activision or, you know, Sony or EA. That was the tool by which I set a system in my home by which he was able to get addicted, because I didn't monitor it enough. I didn't instill the discipline in him or myself enough to prevent it. That's my personal opinion, and it's worth the 2 cents that it's not worth. But you know,
no, it's a really good point, and something else you brought up, which maybe you didn't mean it this way or not, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you know, there are so many people playing even just a title, millions of people, right? So you are going to be exposed or expose your product to lots and lots and lots of people, and lots of people you'll never meet. And in that, I'm just saying you're getting a larger cross section of not just this country, of the planet in some situations. However, and I've never really said this out loud much, but probably to myself, is, you know, people are getting exposed to games a lot younger. It's a lot larger part of our lives than when it originally came out. And all I'm getting at is, I'm an eternal optimist, and I'm always, we'll get better from learning, and we'll get better over time. And even during COVID, we'll learn from this and get better. It's just, that's the way my brain works. But in saying that, I think, the kids that are playing now will be parents. You know, kids that played way back are grandparents. And I think, understanding it, going through it, we're evolving and adapting as a user base. I hate to say it like that, but in that, I'm just saying, I think we'll be better armed as parents, better prepared as parents. And some of us may have been addicted going through it, and now we're parents. And so I just think from all that, it's changing. Early on, kids were playing games, but their parents or their grandparents had no clue to what they're doing. And that's still true today to some degree, but it's becoming less and less and less and less over time. So all I'm saying is, my hope is, for people that, and I hate they're in that situation where a child could be addicted to a game or games, that we're better equipped, and more responsible in many, many ways. And I'm not talking as a developer, I'm actually talking as a parent.
Absolutely. There's way more resources out there now than there
is. And I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying it's a panacea. I can speak directly. I had a child that, he's an adult now, but he was addicted, and, I was game developer during that, and I had to pull all the games out of the house. And,
right.
I'll tell this story very, very briefly, but
didn't you go design his own game after you pulled him all out of the house?
That's or something the one. Like that? And and he's not in the industry, but he's a programmer. And, I was like all upset and pissed off as a dad, like, what are you playing? And it's like this little game he made himself. And I was like, wow.
I mean, that's awesome. I got to give the kids some ingenuity there.
But I mean, and, my kid, I was like, deep down, I was like, wow, way to go, son. But my point in that story, right or wrong, whether I did good or bad, or my wife and I did good or bad in that, a lot of ingenuity, and he needed to get his whatever. So he made it.
Right. Yeah.
For me, this is also an interesting thing too. And not that I'm passing judgment by any means, because obviously I have my young kids, and I have my own household that has its good things and its bad things that happen. But, for people who want to put the blame on gaming, and games, and, getting kids addicted, or, having those sorts of things, to me, it's funny to see how a lot of those same components that make a game enjoyable to play, or, hit that pleasure zone to where people could get addicted, are now actually being leveraged in educational platforms. So, we all, Drew, I know you've seen them, there's ABC Mouse, there's these different educational tools that they're video game based. They have an educational component behind it. So to me, I kind of, like I laugh sometimes when people are like, oh, gaming is going to be the end of us. But here, my second grader, here's ABC Mouse, here's Lexia, here's this video game where you're getting rewarded for learning stuff. But I have no problem with you spending 6 hours on an iPad teaching yourself stuff, especially, now when everybody's been in quarantine and staying at home. And, we all realize that teachers are amazing, people that need all the grace in the world when we get mad at them. So to me, it's one of those where there's a little bit of, people being hypocrites on times of, I hate gaming, gaming's addictive, but yet I'm going to use it to pose education. And to me, Mark, you mentioned that there's so many positives around it and how many ways that gaming can be used for good, that to me, I don't want to knock ABC Mouse. I don't want to knock any of these companies that have figured out a way to trigger a kid who might be struggling in a classroom to help them learn to count or help them learn to read. So I think a lot of these same positive things coming out of the game development are now moving into education.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you bringing that up for a lot of reasons. But a lot of just human computer interaction especially in the gaming industry and other fields of software development, we've been playing with this for a long time now, relatively speaking. I mean, it's a short time in human existence, but as far as user interfaces, GUIs, all these things that are tried, proven now, and expected are being used in training, education. I was fortunate enough to work on a military. I'm not a military person, but I was involved in a project doing military simulated training, and we used all game tech. Maybe not on the hardware side. There was a rear projected dome. It was amazing, and it was for Stinger missile training, and it was safe. It was relatively accurate to the real world. But again, anything that they did in that was basically at its heart and soul was good game design. And then obviously simulation, trying to replicate the best you can of what the real world is, which is, a little different than gaming because it's escapism and you don't want to be exactly real. Otherwise you just be in the real world. For that experience, as crazy as that statement just sounded. But anyways, my point is a lot of those now are tried and proven, and there, as gaming gets more accepted, it's being used more prevalently. And there's lots of applications that I could go over, from medical training for surgeries, using gaming hardware to simulate some of that. Not all of it, but some of it. But I'm just saying it's translating into other areas. And at its heart, the only reason in my opinion, is accepted because it works. And it's getting better. But again, when people get into software and it's not anywhere near what they expect on their favorite game as far as just a pure interface of it, they'll set it down. They'll just almost laugh it off. And that goes for just about any more serious part of gaming that's applied elsewhere.
So to that point, obviously the world that we're in, and you were tied to SMU and have taught classes, and you've made reference to that and, some of the ethics and how the development goes. Mm-hmm. But from where we're going from a broader educational perspective of knowing that you have some universities who are talking about we're going full online in the fall to, we're going to kind of create this hybrid in the classroom for part of it, online for some of it, all the way down to elementary schools. Do you see, a bigger component for those developers and that kind of same gaming to kind of take over and help the education world? Or, from your experience in the education world, are you seeing that, sometimes we know that the people who are the powers that be are a little bit resistant to that change and, are firm in their opinions that way?
I think it comes down to more the culture that exists on a specific university. I think, we talk about this offline. I don't want to say names, but like my mentor was a dean at a various business schools, and adore him. And I'm going to keep him anonymous, but we were just talking the other day that, some of these bigger brands, household name universities, were not geared up to go online. And I would say some of the charm still long-term for some of these programs is not the online component. It's more that face-to-face mentoring, that working guidance, especially when you're doing like team projects and capstones and different things like that. We're getting better, I think, universities aside, at maybe bringing people together to work collaborative remotely. But I'd say some of these schools, it's a hard pivot, and some are pivoting quickly and some are not necessarily household names, but they are providing a great experience. And I really think that's it, though, is the experience you can provide. But if you're trying to like sledgehammer this in quickly because of COVID, some of these schools aren't built that way. And I'll be candid. Some programs I've been involved with, the charm is, the student to student interaction at a level you cannot replicate yet. We might with technology, but I think Zoom meetings and things like this and some classes that are lecture based can definitely work for that. But the collaborative process and those moments you can't capture that are just organic, it's hard. to capture that. I know with you guys and what you're doing, like, when you're creating and developing something, it's a very interpersonal thing, some of these things, and they're not set in time and they're not set in stone. And I think, I don't want to get on a soapbox, but that's hard to replicate. And I think VR will get there someday. Don't think it's there yet as far as the total experience and really like getting our heads and plugged into our heads. Then I think it's easy to pivot at that point, which may or may not even happen in my lifetime. But culturally and adaptability, some schools are set in their ways and others are like, hey, let's try this. We don't care. So it just depends is the answer there. And for me.
Sorry, Drew, go ahead.
No, go ahead, bro.
So for me, like you mentioned charm, and obviously there's a lot of folks who pick commuter schools. There's a lot of folks who go off to school who pick that, campus, it feels like home. I met a couple of these teachers, which I don't think there's a way to replace that for those online. I don't think you can ever, simulate going across country and, learning more about yourself. But from an education perspective, since I took, a few semesters, completely online, I think it calls into, or brings out or calls out, the specific professors and how they teach and how they interact. And ultimately, I think having to teach some sort of a hybrid online course, or if they had to have experience, is going to make their teaching skills better in the classroom, because we've all, had that professor that stands up there in front of a projector and just drones on for an hour and a half, and you're asleep 5 minutes in, and
or they just read their PowerPoints verbatim.
Exactly. Or it's like, great, now I get to go read the book that I haven't picked up all semester to learn what I'm supposed to learn, versus you have some professors where you don't necessarily need to pick up the book. It'd be advisable to pick up the book, before you take the exam or the final, but they are just so good at that interpersonal skills and those interactions of, they could lecture for an hour and a half, but you don't feel like it's an hour and a half. So, to me, this whole situation and having to move to online school can actually call out some things that might need to change in how teachers are trained, or, what's a great teacher or great professor and what's not.
100%. I think regardless of medium, that's the case, right? So, for some, it's just a tool and they'll use it well. For others, it might just accentuate or enhance the problem. I'm not a big fan of, and by the way, I'm going to be really clear. I don't even consider myself an educator. I just found myself there. But I would say those that are accessible, those that make the experience as unique for the individual, even though they, in some classes you can't scale like that. But, when you get to 40, 60, it gets challenging. I think accessibility to an instructor, added value for someone that walks through the door. If you're not providing added value for that individual, I don't care if you're on Zoom or you're in the classroom. If you're not providing that, you're useless, in my opinion. And all of us have had great instructors, and all of us have had poor instructors. I agree. I think this place we're in on the short right now has just highlighted efficiencies and problems. And even for individuals. So someone told me, I don't know what metric, what university this was, but they were telling their professors for every 1 hour of online, they should be preparing 15 hours for 1 hour of time in the class. Now, whether that's right or wrong, and for some professors that freaked them out, and others are probably like, yeah, I do that every day. That's my point. That's my example. And I think it's a really valid point you bring up. It's still, education is education. But I think if you can create some interactivity, even with Zoom, rather than I'm just, and I'm going at the mouth yammering right now myself, but, creating that interactivity between yourself and the student, I still think you can do that through any medium to some degree. Maybe not exactly how it is, what it was prior to COVID, but I still think you can create an added value, added experience, get the most out of that student that you can. And there's so many instructors out there like that. And there's bad instructors that don't care and just going through the motions. And this is going to accentuate that.
Yeah, I'm curious to see, because I think that there's, whether it's something that's built into education curriculum moving, educator education curriculum moving forward, or if a lot of these school districts and universities bake it into their next in-service session or whatever, I think there's definitely a need for training for educators on how to leverage and utilize. I mean, and I'm talking beyond and above like how to send out an invite for a Zoom call and mute people, but like how to dynamically utilize the curriculum in some of these mediums, and especially I think at the university level, I would imagine it's probably more applicative there, because I don't think from a developmental standpoint we're really going to change the way that we educate at the elementary level. And Brad, from Jenny's experience, you may have a different perspective on that, but I think the way you educate a kindergartner is probably, I don't think we're going to heavily integrate and replace teacher didaction with technology, but I think at that level it's more supplementary, right? To your point earlier, like the ABC mouses and things like that. I think you're going to see over the next 12 to 36 months an explosion in technology based, whether it's supplemental or replacement technologies, and because people are seeing the need for it and the value of it. And we've talked about it ad nauseum between, in our internal group, of how I'm a pitiful first grade teacher, as is my wife. I mean, my God bless her, she's a saint and she did as best she could, but she's a physician assistant. She's a pediatric person, not a teacher. And so I think that you're going to see a lot of that come out of that, and in hand with that, these teachers are going to there's going to be this hybrid education that's necessary to teach them how to utilize that technology and to your point, be a better, more dynamic educator because of it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. To your point, it's hard to teach elementary, kindergarten, first grade. There's so many things that have to be hands-on. You can only replace so much of that or supplement so much of that. But I mean, just think handwriting in general. Like teaching a kid to write, I know that there's the whole debate on whether or not people still need to be able to write, and, whether or not we're teaching cursive in schools or stuff like that, but, having obviously recently been through it, both of us, I have a hard time teaching my kid how to write. Like I know how to write. I've written for, many, many years now, but the actual, here's how you hold a pencil, and then, here's some of this, and like those, early education, professionals, teachers, they've been taught how to handle those things. When you get to college, I mean, let's face it, you have your students who are very, very interactive and will be interactive, and they know what their passion is and they know where it draws. And then you also have the people who you're lucky if they show up to class once a month and are just there having a good time and going to college for 8 years that aren't doctors. So to that point, to me, it's going to be interesting. And, I can say that, I've seen some elementary schools and even some high schools do fantastic jobs of how to create it and supplement it and really pivot on the fly. And then there's also been some that have struggled. But to your earlier point, Drew, like the teachers being able to use it, like most educators, we in the business world go, oh, Zoom, WebEx, Teams, they're all the same kind of platform. It's just the nuances in, and it might take me a couple times the first, time or two that I need to hop on an external call where, you don't use your same system. But for educators, they never have to have Zoom meetings. They never have to have WebEx meetings. It's, hey, we all need to have a meeting. All right, 3:30 in the conference room. Yeah, exactly. So to your point, it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of those platforms and what tools come out to actually assist the teachers, because I think, there's been a lot of negative things of the situation we're in, but I think a few positive ones are, we all realize that most of us are not educators. And if we are somewhat capable of it, we don't want to do it. So, how can we help those who have chosen that profession? And, for a long time, it's been a pretty thankless profession, which, to me, it should bring back a lot of appreciation and some of the ways that they've gone out of their way to treat, our kids or, just the youth in general, because that is the next generation. And, it's, to me, there's all good things to move forward out of it. But to Mark's point earlier, it's called out some gaps that we can address that might have been overlooked and, might have been problems 20, 30 years ago from an education perspective, but we just went, things are working great, not a big deal.
Yeah. The elementary part is a little bit more challenging, I think. Assume technology can create better experiences remotely, whatever that means. Being able to read people when you're looking at, I do it a lot where we're in a meeting and 8, 12 people have been on a meeting. It's very hard to identify responses to what I'm saying, or if I'm presenting something to a group, but we're more skilled, more adept, right? Than, let's say, you guys with your kids at home. That's probably the most challenging area. And then, obviously most parents aren't formally trained to be educators. And then I have some friends where they were paying quite a bit of money for even elementary education. And now they're being like, and here, go teach your kids and pay this tuition fee, right?
Yeah.
And if forget us for a minute, if you think about the kids, the social dynamics, the interaction, etiquette inside of a classroom, that's where I see the real challenges for, let's just say, who knows how long we're going to be in this state. And if this goes through fall and further, let's say worst case scenario, I think at that level, that's probably the hardest thing. I think disseminating information or educating your children to some degree can get better. But, in my opinion, it's going to be really hard to replace those developmental skills as it's group setting stuff, and it's kind of where my heart goes out, at least for these kids now.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, I had a neighbor that's a good friend with my son that just had a birthday, and she's going to go into 2nd or 3rd grade. And, from across the street, like, hey, your birthday's coming up. What do you want for your birthday? And the response was, I just want to go to school and play with my friends. Yeah. Like, imagine that, like 7, 8, 9-year-old all of a sudden going, instead of, hey, I want this toy or a scooter or a bike, it's, I just want to go to school so I can see my friends.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. We pivot, the Abacus 3 side of me that does, esports, community building, all these different things where, we develop all kinds of things within esports, but, the physical events going to online events, and you're seeing a lot of that. But, oddly, people are reaching out, not through event companies I partner with and work with that are huge. People are missing, adults are missing that a funeral, a wedding, that is more tactile, face-to-face social interaction. And, for me personally, working on advanced technologies as it relates to blurring the line between virtual audiences and physical audiences, I think this is propelling us. I don't know if it'll sustain the propulsion, but it's really identified that for some of us that were thinking about this stuff way before COVID, as far as bringing virtual to experience something in their house that they couldn't experience in any other way. But if you someday, I think there's something to be said in a demand or a need for, I can't get to that really good friend's wedding, or I can't get to that really good friend that passed. And if we could make that somehow meaningful through technology, I think that's brilliant. We just can't pivot fast enough right now for the demand. Right. But those that have some of these things, just baby stepping people into that space, are doing very, very well right now. So it's not a great place we're in, but we're learning so much. And for some of us, it's really advocating for possibly some technological solves, if that makes sense. I just don't think the technology is as advanced to give the experience that I was describing, that I can feel the same way physically at a space that I would sitting in my house remotely. I think that's a big chasm where we're going to cross it someday, but we're just starting.
Yeah, I had two thoughts, and I'd love if you could, and if you can do this, you're even more brilliant than I think you already are. If you could dovetail this into what you're doing in virtual arenas and whatnot. So my wife, like I said, is a pediatric PA, and she about 9 months ago, she had a kiddo, a 10 or 11-year-old dude that got diagnosed with leukemia, and he had to be in the hospital for a long stretch of time for treatment and whatnot. And the school that he went to here locally, they had a program where he essentially had a robot with an iPad hooked up to it and speakers and that kind of thing, to where he could actually, and then he had a laptop at the hospital and was able to literally go to his classes with his, I think somebody locally was controlling the movement of it, so obviously he didn't run into people and those kinds of things. But he was actually able to attend class, and it showed him, with the webcam and that kind of thing. Now, obviously it's not from a tactile standpoint. I mean, he's not feeling and sensing the class from a tactile standpoint, but he was at least getting the visual and the audible pieces of it. And then you couple that with, I'm a habitual consumer of podcasts, and Rogan interviewed Elon Musk a couple weeks ago, and I was just recently listening to that, and Musk was talking about, for the love of me, the neural network thing that he specifically is working on, or he's a part of the development. So we're literally it's this plate that will go into your, this chip that goes into your brain, and wires actually tie into centers in the brain to where you could have that kind of virtual experience. And it's actually it's sending the same signals to your brain, that, if you were to reach out and touch me on the shoulder virtually, it's actually telling my brain, hey, Mark just reached out and touched you on the shoulder, and my nerves would sense it because that's what it's telling. And I don't understand any of that because I'm not nearly intelligent enough. But I'm curious in terms of, some of the virtual stuff that you guys are working on. Where does that play, and where does the technology, what's the gap? Where do we bridge to get even close to something like that?
That touches on a lot of things. I've worked on VR and I've worked on AR projects. I mean, for VR, it's a little less than 1.0 on VR relative to that, where you're basically eliminating as much peripherals hardware so you can experience it, where either you're just, tapping direct drive into your neural network. Now, again, back to our earlier conversation, that can be used for good and that can be used for bad. And I'm not saying it's bad to do that. But I think that's truly VR, what was just described, where your sensory perceptions, all five are tapped into. I think ultimately that our kids will probably see that or experience that, or maybe you guys will, or I will, who knows? But I think that's down the road. And I think that truly is virtual reality.
Yeah. So right now we're at two senses. Widespread, right? I mean, we can get audible and visually at a widespread.
Exactly.
Right?
And to be very tangible, I can't get into some of the proprietary tech that I'm working on too, but I'll say it this way. The approach is audio and visual, and to work with what most people have in their hands already, which is either mobile, 2D screens, things of that nature. Doing that well on the short will hit the masses. And giving them, like I said, it's always about giving them an experience they normally could not have got. But we're trying to work more, and I'll give you more of the approach on design. Work with what people have, but they can experience in a way they haven't before, right? And so you're absolutely right. That says it very well. It's really it's visual and it's audio. And I'll be clear, even in esports, it's so 1.0. That can be there's so much potential and opportunity there right now, and even for traditional sports or Broadway plays, if you will, whatever, that can be explored and exploited in a good way, actually, to bridge the audience at home. Again, like I always say, to maybe the physical. And all of it can be staged virtually too. It doesn't need to be just physical. But you're right. It's mostly, and you can do some tactile stuff with virtual reality, but it's mainly touching, picking up virtual objects in a 3-dimensional space, things like that, which has, but you don't feel it. It's very, the immersion gets broken because you can't really, you can give some feedback, but not the same dexterity that you have picking up any object. But we're getting better there. So I think the next would be, the third would be probably the tactile dexterity, which we're getting there.
And that's through like haptic sensors and those kinds of things is how that gets accomplished.
Yep, Exactly. Yeah. So
yeah,
player one bodysuits.
That's the next one that starts to be, is getting better and explored with different peripherals. So
right, because I think that's the challenge in VR, right? Is that because right now, and I'm mildly ignorant to this. There's a few different widely accepted from an industry standard point of view of headsets and controls, right? To where you can manipulate those things, but to your point, to get that tactile feedback, you've got to have. I mean, that's a pretty advanced piece of technology to have, depending on how immersive you want to get in it, right? Yeah. Do I just want my hands? Do I want my whole body? Do I, and then, I mean, there's a massive black rabbit hole we could run down of, like how, the beneficence with, juxtaposed to, me sitting in a full out tactile suit, what does that do to me mentally? And then being able to, this is just me, and Brad knows this. I have a foil hat over here I'll put on sometimes of like, once I plug in, we've all seen the movies, right? We've seen The Matrix. We've seen, all of these different, movies that play into this fact of, Inception and all that of is what we're really experiencing, is like me sitting in my home office talking to you two guys. Is this reality? Or is this some sort of, am I part of some other reality that this is the virtual reality of it, right? And then and so when you start, and I'm unwillingly a participant in that to the best of my cognition, but when I then start putting virtual realities into what I believe to be my reality from a psychological standpoint, that line can get blurred real quick, and how do you unplug? And the better we get at it, the more difficult it is to unplug it.
So
right?
a matrix within a matrix, Drew.
Right. Don't go there. I will put my hat on. but that's again, to the conversation we were having earlier, the better you get at it, right? The closer what you're doing gets to actual reality. And that's a really awesome thing. And to your point, we can use that for lots of good, right? Like if you can somehow create a medical training platform to where that virtual experience is almost completely identical to what, a surgeon would be cutting on, a cadaver or a live person, right? Well, now my ability to train people, I can train field surgeons in the bush of Africa, and they can, now I've increased the, the potential of people's health globally. But at the same time, if I'm plugged into that and you can somehow figure out, there's many nefarious uses for that. And so balancing that, making sure we're securing it and doing it for good, again, that's why I say that's a black rabbit hole we can run down. But it's the beauty of technology, right? It affords us those things. And then we just have to be responsible stewards of it.
Correct. 100% agree. Yeah.
Yeah. But so for you, and you kind of hit on it a little bit, what do you feel like is the next? I know you said tactile, but from a mass consumable piece, like what's the next tech hardware that you see coming in the virtual space? Is it legitimately like a full out haptic tactile suit, or what?
Like I said, I think, I don't want to get too sci-fi out there. I'm only going to try to speak to what I know is the best you can bring someone that's not physically in an arena, but at their home, and relay any feedback they may have to the experience into the physical space, there's a lot we're doing in that right now. I'm not the biggest fan of adding a lot of peripherals onto people until, you know, like I said, we can get to that place that an Elon Musk is alluding to and things of that. But there's a lot you can do with what's out there now. I'm a big believer that a lot of creativity comes from limitations. So if you kind of limit the sandbox you have, I'm around some people, not myself. I'm not taking credit for any of this, but I'm around some pretty creative people that are taking existing tech and bridging those gaps. That's my approach right now, and it's, you know, seems to be relatively successful, at least on people wanting to experiment with those, and we'll learn a lot from them. I think, you know, in my opinion, I think where you blur the line between the virtual and the physical, and you really couldn't tell the difference anymore. I hate saying it that way. That's, I think, where we'll ultimately be headed. But to do that takes a lot of training and a lot of guidance from users. So VR is not the easiest thing because there's no common language. The way you know, when I'm talking to people designing it or students trying to design for it, there's no common language. It's like, you got to think of your users as like, this is like showing people how to use a mouse that don't know how to use a mouse. Like you know, that day existed back in the 70s and 80s, which I recall. And it wasn't like just pick up a mouse and go. And virtual is the same. And my point is, to get to these further places, you got to educate the masses on a common language. And that's what I like about, you know, I'm very passionate, very much an evangelist on what I'm working on now. But it really is to give people the tools and the understanding how to use these things. And you're kind of leading, not that people aren't intelligent, it's just you need to know how to use these things when you go in. It becomes part of your vocabulary, vernacular in technology. That's why I like using with a lot of things we already have. You're just telling the people to apply them in a different way. So I'm not the best to answer candidly. I'm not the best to answer like what I think the newest hardware will look like. It's more the experience that I'm trying to bridge to the new hardware. if that
right.
Even
No, that makes perfect sense, especially in the space you're in, right? Because whether it's esports and arenas, that's all, you know, if I'm sitting in the arena, you know, watching, you know, a tournament or whatnot, that's a very particular type of experience versus, you know, right now it's, you know, and I've only dipped my toe in this water, but, you know, watching those same types of tournaments online right now is a vastly different experience. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, and maybe you can help clarify, but what you're trying to do is to make those experiences as identical as you can. What I experience at home versus if I were to go down to ESA here in Arlington and see a tournament is identical as we can get. Right?
Exactly. And so the same is on the other side, on the physical side. If I go to a physical event and it's not any better than I can get at home just watching it on Twitch, what's the point? So
right.
Those are the things we're not looking at. Those things that we're working on. So like, let's say you're at an event and you're watching League, you know, you're watching LOL specifically. That, or, you know, CSGO is another one where you can actually, when you're there in the space, you actually feel like you're in the game, not just a spectator watching on a stage, that you can hear those players coming behind you. You can do directional, positional audio. Really cool stuff. Now, once you do that, easy enough to just put on a headset and feel like you're somewhere in that stadium, and you can point and you can be positional audio relative to where you would be into position of the stage. Right. You know, those are very doable things that need to be explored. That's why I say esports is, you know, I love it. Don't get me wrong, but I'm a big critic of what we do well and what we don't do well. And one thing I don't think we do well is, you know, create that it's very different. experience, and gamers expect it candidly, and it's just very kind of Me Too sports like. And again, I am a sports fan, but they're just doing they're replicating what is already done, and that's fine for now. It has so much further to go, and I think that community multitasks very, 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 very well. So we can not saturate, but we could tax or push the envelope of what an audience expects at events.
Yeah, I'm curious because you brought it up with live traditional sports. I don't know if that's a PC, the not esports, the baseball, basketball, football. I guess we'll go with traditional sports for that. We had Scott McNeely on the podcast, a few episodes back, and he even made the mention of, coming out of this whole COVID thing, like we might not be going back to big stadiums completely full with people for some time, or his thought was maybe even ever. Right. And I don't think anybody, as a sports fan, I don't like the idea of watching a baseball game or a football game on TV with an empty stadium, because that would just, so much of what happens in live sports is that ambiance, and you get, it's a Yankees Red Sox game, and you got some jackwagon, like screaming at Jeter and what, like that's part of the experience, right? Yep. But I'm curious as how much, and this is strictly an opinion question, your thoughts that some of what's being done with esports and the virtual arena kind of thing, how applicable, would that be? Scott brought up the point of like, maybe, while you're watching the TV and, Tiger's in his backswing, you could yell like, don't shank it, and there's like speakers set up on the, on the tee box, and that comes out or whatever. But like, how do you, what are your thoughts? And I'm literally just asking as an opinion, like, how do you see some of the technology that's being developed in the esports space?
So it's being applied as fast and as readily available for that. If NFL, when it comes back, NBA, when it comes back, NHL, when it comes back, and some of those sports, and baseball's a little bit trickier only because every stadium, no two are alike in the MLB. But you're in my wheelhouse of at least potential clients that we're proving proof of concept. Like I said, there are some people already kind of in that space. There's going to be others that do it better qualitatively, but it's really to bring the fans at home there. Now they're physically, you won't see them, but you should be able to hear them. And then if there's, you could even potentially, or upsell, I hate to say it that way, if someone wants to sit behind the dugout and start screaming at the player they hate, that may not come out over the general broadcast, but it sure as hell could come out on the field during the event. Now, all to be said, it's just trying to bridge. I think the players will be the metric here, in my opinion. Playing inside an empty stadium is going to suck for the, there's such an energy built, especially at key moments that actually affect the game in the best way. You could do that through audio to some degree, but you're not, people are coming up with crazy ideas to put LED screens around, and then, your face is sitting there, that just seems so, I don't know, not immersive from a player standpoint, but the audio might be there. And then I would say you're going to be I'm not saying like, I'm saying like things that I would guess from a fan standpoint on questions we may be asked is, you don't want to see a foul ball fly into an empty stadium, clank, 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 with no fans running for the ball like crazy fans that we are. So I think camera is going to be very, and I think the XFL did it to some degree. I know those stadiums weren't packed, but you're going to be much more creative about the visuals that you see. But you can get the audience at home into that space through audio. Now, these are very short-term answers, but that's the way we look at it from gaming and bringing stuff that we would from esports or whatever the case may be. And we want to get better in that space. It's just, this has heightened the different sectors that need it. They're begging for it. Now there's smaller events, UFC, boxing, that you can literally put on a virtual stage just because the arena is so small. And then you can fake if you will, the environment around, or you could even make it a little fantasy if they want to go that way during COVID. Now, those are very doable things. Those places exist if they want to do those things, and then bring the crowd in, and you can do that.
Yeah, I think your barrier to entry with at least professional sports, traditional sports, right? Is if I'm an owner, right? I make a lot, not all, but a lot of my money from the butts in the seats, right? So if I'm making the experience for somebody to sit at home better than, in theory, that's an opinion, and better than to come to my stadium,
Yeah.
Somehow, right? You got to figure out a way to monetize that at home experience in some way, right? I'm not saying that you're not suggesting that, but I think that'll be a creativity point, right? You got to get creative with how you, and obviously to your point, you can upsell a lot of that or provide options, right?
Yes.
From a sale.
And again, those things, I think they'll help build long-term better experience. Again, some of these are business driven, short-term, anything. So I don't lose fan base, things of that nature. But, right now I don't have a crystal ball, but, Dodger Stadium, Yankee Stadium, these places that pack every night, and that's not all of MLB, but that's not an insignificant per game loss, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
but again, if you can get, if these things bridge on the short, whether the short be a year or 2 years, hopefully not that long for events. I think it all helps. But I think it might help even in ways we don't anticipate it. I keep saying, I think this is accelerating applications and technology, just because the demand is so high, and it's not being replaced. I'm not the biggest golf fan, but I watched Tiger and Phil, and I watched that event over the weekend. I did not realize how starved I was for that type of content. Now, it was a good event. I don't know how good it was because, like I said, I was so starved for something.
Yeah, when you haven't eaten for months, that saltine tastes like filet.
Yeah, so I got a few opinions on those things because I watched that too. And I think, Drew, back to your point of, how do owners get people in the seats of traditional sports? Well, I mean, that's been a battle that's been going on for a while, ever since we've pulled out multiple camera angles and zoomed in angles. And, I think the passion of the fan is to get more of that behind the scenes in depth, so Mark, you mentioned the golf match that it was. And to me, part of what made it the most entertaining is you actually get some of that commentary between the players that you would never get on a normal level. But that's something as a fan that we want, we're all in Dallas and we can all go to the Cowboy Stadium to watch a Cowboys game. But, some of the biggest, complaints if they're playing a bad team or if it's not going, you end up watching an 80-yard long TV, and you're not getting all the different angles. Or if, I'm sitting in the nosebleeds, like I can barely tell what number who is, and so whereas if I stay home and watch it on TV, I get all the different angles. And this is where I think XFL push the envelope there is you start talking in-game interviews. You've seen golf go to, hey, we're going to try and get this conversation between a caddy and a player. You've seen baseball go, hey, here's this, in between inning interview that we're trying to get people insight and access to. And, not that I've watched a lot of esports and a lot of e-gaming, but they were on the forefront of, hey, I can tie into what everybody's saying to everybody and kind of get that experience there. So to me, it's going to be interesting and always has been interesting because you're going to still have your traditional sports fan who I'd rather watch it, in a stadium or I'd rather, versus on TV. But, to the other point that we brought up earlier is audio makes a big deal. I don't think anybody's ever realized, or if you have, you don't really pay that much attention to it, is when you talk about these, pressure games, playoff games, rivalry games, even during a regular season. Have you ever noticed that the crowd audio is way higher in those games than it actually is in a normal event? And to that point, it makes, I know football is, more people like watching football than, baseball and golf and some of those things. But when you actually pay attention to the crowd noise that's pumping through on a traditional football game, we've all been to football games, there's in all sports events, there's an electricity kind of a buzz in the air, but it just seems like when you turn on a football game, it's the middle of the first quarter and it's nothing, but you're all of a sudden into a game, whether or not I care about who's playing or not. And you just kind of feel your adrenaline level pop up where, I played baseball. I've been to plenty of baseball stadiums. If I turn on a game in the fourth inning, okay, like it is what it is. Or you have people who flip in a golf tournament, to Mark, to your point of, you may not be the biggest golf fan, but you were so desperate for that content that you chimed into it. And there is, golf to me is the most easy sport to play without fans because we can all go play golf by ourselves with nobody actually around. In fact, to me, it actually takes out a little bit of that pressure because, having people there, for professional athletes, fans are fans, but they don't have to worry about, hey, is Drew going to yell in the middle of my backswing because he's an idiot, that type of thing. Whereas, at a traditional basketball, football, baseball, trust me, I've been called enough bad names in my life from that's part of the fan going experience. But to me, it's very interesting because to me, there are some drawbacks to traditional professional sports of, I know, but by the time I buy a ticket, right, and take my family and buy food and parking, sometimes I'm spending north of $500 just for a ticket to sit in the upper deck. When you take in food and parking, all that stuff, where, I could pay $15 a month to have an added subscription to get all this live access, which is where you saw MLB TV, the NFL Network, NBA TV, all those things coming in. But to me, it's going to be very interesting, from the developer side, if we can actually take and go, you know what, I have this access, I pay for this subscription, but hey, for this particular game, I want to pay $60 and get a VR experience of I'm sitting, right behind the bench of an NBA game, or I'm sitting at the 50-yard line and actually get that immersive experience. To me, it's going to create a big problem for traditional sports in general if I can get that content there. But on the flip side, I know some owners had previously talked about, and I believe the Oakland A's talked about it almost a decade ago and couldn't get the approval for it, but they were wanting to put iPads in all the premier seats that would basically flip out of your console like the emergency exit TV screen on an airlines, and actually be able to pull up different camera shots and different in-game stats and some of those things. So to me, it's going to be an interesting battle of which technology wins out and, where you can get people.
Yeah. So first thing off, react to that, people always want to go to physical events and they always want that camaraderie with other fans. So parking that is always a need. There's other, Absolutely. I think even now, rather than look at, like, oh, we got to replicate like it was, there's so many opportunities, like you said, content, and content is king. And then the other side is to give more accessibility to users, whatever that may be, camera control, different angles, and extruding that out and putting it in the hands of users. Why not during COVID if we can move that quickly to do some of those things? So it's not just like, oh, I miss not seeing the fans. Now, I'm not talking from a player's perspective, which is a whole nother thing, and I'll mention that here in a second. But for fans sitting at home, they'll be like, I wasn't able to do this before. And I know they're trying to make it more entertaining and provide more content and accessibility. I don't see anything wrong with that. It's not for the purest sports like MLB, especially, hopefully they would entertain such things. These are big franchises with a lot of brand building and they don't want to wreck that. You got to be mindful. But if you can give better accessibility into your sport, I'm like, why not? But that's my opinion. But I think that stuff is very monetizable. Accessibility. I'm all about accessibility. I'm all about user created content. I just come from that world. Or that mindset. But I think you can do that in traditional sports. You can do that almost in any form of entertainment, actually. So I think there's opportunity during COVID. Lots of us, lots of people are out there suffering. Lots of companies are suffering. I get it. Lots of people are hurting. Lots of people want to get back. Social distancing is awkward as hell. I understand all that. But I'm just saying, there are other ways to look at some of these things if you have the ability to affect some of these things, right? And so that's where I see opportunity. I don't see opportunity. I don't want opportunity on people's despair. Don't get me. I'm just saying,
right,
these limitations, like I said, make you think of life differently and you can get really creative. Now, from a player standpoint, not seeing people and hearing people and positional audio onto a court, let's say, use basketball, and I can kind of hear, Jack Nicholson talking trash at mid-court at Staples. Possible to do that, but you don't see Jack. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying from a player's perspective, who knows? And you have to govern where that audio is coming from as well. You don't want to take a home court and turn it into an away game. For instance, not just because Cowboy fans are everywhere. Dodger fans are everywhere. Yankee fans are everywhere. Notre Dame Irish fans are everywhere. You could see how something like that, you have to be very mindful of input and traffic. But this is not sci-fi. This is all doable stuff. It's just, we've got to play and iterate with it. But again, I don't think it's lost. Even if COVID, miraculously, thank goodness, if we got a vaccine tomorrow, I think all this stuff just helps entertainment value, user experience value. I'm not placing that great importance on mankind. I'm just saying, I think that's what out of this too, because these things aren't going to go away. People are going why aren't we doing that anyways? Kind of thing. So
right,
yeah, absolutely. And the thing that I'm two thoughts. One is, and this I guess is going back to the esports side, because you obviously can't do this in live traditional sports, but in those, if you're in that arena, and I've heard this in somewhere, I'd love for you to kind of educate us a little bit, but how there's either it's starting or there's a movement to where in some, in a tournament, whether it's CSGO or, Legends or whatever, to where participants may have the option to vote to change a part of the map that the tournament's being played on, or manipulate those types of things. Is that something? I know it's got to, at least there's been talk about it because I've heard about it, but in terms of implementation, and then that's definitely a unique thing. I equate that as at a baseball stadium where you could turn on the wind or make it start raining in a football game or something like that. And how widespread is that? And then I'm beyond that, I'm curious about the data that comes with that. We can talk about that in a second.
Sure. That's a really good question. Technically, that's all very feasible and all very doable. Some games are easier to manipulate than others. Some may need to be, you may have to recreate some things within a game. But I'll flip it around on the other perspective, which is, you have pro organizations, and I'm not saying they drive the world, but you have pro esports organizations, and these people are training continually for certain expected things to happen within their plan. And they're dedicating, for a short period. Esports players aren't around because it takes so much mental acuity and dexterity, right? When you're investing like that, and some of these a lot, like investing in the franchise to play some of these games is not cheap. Investing in players is not cheap. Building your brand's not cheap. My point is, you have to balance all these things, do you want a football game and people just start chucking bottles off of players to see if they survive the game or whatever? I'm just being extremely crazy right now, but
no, you're just in Philadelphia.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Or I'm a Dodger fan, so you're in San Francisco and they're throwing batteries at my players. So, that's a joke.
There you go.
Or, I don't know if that was a joke. So anyways.
No, those have happened before. So you're spot on.
So anyways, my point is, you have to look. Feasibility, is it interesting for the fans? Absolutely. The people that are actually competing, because I do, look at esports as athletes. I really, really do. There is so much training involved with that on so many levels. You have to balance it all. The content versus the players. And maybe that becomes its own format for some esports games, which is, it's just crazy town when you get out there, and they have to be prepared for everything. And that it may go to that. It's interesting. It's just the existing very popular esports games are probably going to be a little resistant. to that. But I think some things that maybe affect the aesthetics that may not affect the core gameplay, I'm sure they'll be open to stuff like that. And really all you're getting at is more fan engagement at a more intricate level, right? And I think those are the things that you'll see happen in esports and traditional sports.
Gotcha. Yeah, and then the thing, I mean, all of this that we've been talking about, from the traditional sports interactions and then all the stuff going on with esports, is there's just this massive amount of data that's getting thrown around, like, and then especially when you're talking about in virtual reality, right? And if you're talking about gaming in virtual reality, all of that, the IO that goes on there in terms of interpreting what I'm doing and how that affects how you perceive things, and that's just from a data standpoint, I don't even, I'll be completely honest, I have absolutely no clue the volume, but it has to be massive. And then if you're doing that in terms of cloud versus console gaming, or even if, like, where that's happening in general, those VR interactions that you were talking about, obviously that data is being processed somewhere. I'm assuming if it's done over an internet connection, a game that I'm playing on a computer, like I don't even know how, from a latency standpoint, how you pull that off without massive amounts of compute, and to steal another Scott McNeelyism, a data ocean out there that's just sitting around spinning this data up.
Yeah, so data is important. Data is important to sponsors. Data is important to a lot of people, and accessibility to people. Now, gaming community is pretty savvy to, don't tap too far into me. They're very leery of that. But you, purely on the gaming standpoint within games, we collect a lot of data, and we want to know and predict player behavior. Really to satisfy player behavior or player sentiment, and getting pretty sophisticated. Now, in physical spaces, you're right, it's real-time data. You can pull out some. You probably can't go as deep as you want to go, but if you start to infuse virtual elements into the physical, then you can tap real time into that. Now, obviously, that's going to scale and cap, and you're going to have thresholds to it, or you're going to have to start partitioning out data real time and then figure out what you're going to do. Now, you can do that, but I think that's the interesting bit here, is when physical spaces start to exhibit some synthetic experiences, then you can start to extrude out data, just purely because now you're digitally connected, right? So in the pro sport, the traditional sports, if you will, baseball, football, etc. They'll love that as well. So I'm just saying, we're talking about things I think that cross-pollinate in really awesome ways.
Absolutely. Yeah,
I don't know if that answered it, but I just see, as you look at the physical spaces doing traditionally what they were doing, harder extrude data through like ticket purchasing and food F&B purchasing, but like, what are they actually doing during an event? I think we can start to do that purely with them interacting with the event, if that makes sense. Because once then you do that, then you can follow button presses, blah, 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 blah. And, without getting into people's personal lives, but just the behavior of the general audience and stuff like that. I'm a big data fan. I'm a big data, but purely to create better experiences and help sponsors, monetize, and without helping your community.
Right. No, and that's exactly what I was driving at from that standpoint of it is, I mean, and I think people, there's a balance in everyone. It's at an individual level of how much privacy am I willing to give up to improve the experience that I get, right? And everybody has to balance that for themselves. And the better you can individually allow people, if I'm at a stadium and I have the option, like, okay, you get it all, Jack, but I get, like this mind-blowing experience, or I give you a little bit and I get a little bit better experience to allow me as an individual to decide that. I think you get, a much higher interaction and engagement rate with that type of content and data.
100% agree. And it really at the heart of that is trust, and then delivering an expectation and continually delivering high quality on that. And I know that sounds, it's not trivial to do that, but it's very good for the people supplying the content and very good for the users, right? So it's all about trust. And I'm using this to help your experience be better, and I'm delivering that time in and time out, right? That has nothing to do with sponsor. That has nothing to do with monetizing on that level, but it sure as heck does when you're providing product or content for people, right? And there's psychology to that as well. But at the heart of what you said, Joe, you're building trust between you and your consumer, you and your user, and you're transparent in that. I think if you're transparent on what you're doing, and then you do that, but trust can be broken in this stuff, as you guys know, instantly. And that's kind of how we bridge sponsors into it too, into esports just quickly is, people will trust the sponsor and appreciate the sponsor if they're doing something meaningful for the users at the end of the day, especially in gaming.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're right. We as humans are akin to that kind of trust and relate. I mean, think about, my family, my wife and my in-laws family, they're Ford people. They only drive Fords and they won't drive anything but a Ford, right? Well, why? Well, because great grandpa worked at a Ford dealership back in 19 whatever, right? And that's the only reason, but they built that trust. And so all we drive is Fords, right? And I know in the gaming industry, it's just, that you got cats that they have specific types of peripheral that they only use, and there's an affinity for that. So I think it's there, the opportunity is there, right? To your point, you have to build that. It's a different type of affinity rather than a product, which I think as humans, we're much more akin to, develop an affinity and a trust with something we can touch and hold and taste and feel. But what you're talking about is an experience and building trust in somebody to consistently deliver an experience for me, which at its very core, experiences are massively dynamic, right? And I think you would probably know this better than any of the three of us or Brad and I. Having to consistently deliver an experience at a certain level is much harder, from a qualities control standpoint, because I can make sure my Ford drives the same way it's driven for the past 50 years because I just make sure the way we build it and the products we use are the same, right? But with an interpersonal experience, there are an infinite number of factors that go into providing that experience, and a lot of them you don't have any control over. Right. So you just have to control what you control as best as you can, and beyond that, it is what it is, right?
But that's really that's where the data comes in, though, right? Like that just helps you intellectually understand what player sentiment or community sentiment is, what they expect, and then you try to meet that best you can at the end of the day. But that at its heart is, and I know you know this as well, is that's at its heart, which at least we use data for. Then it provides ancillary value for other people involved with it. So
for sure. So Mark, I know we hit on some stuff that you're working on with A3. I want to make sure that we give enough time. I mean, are there other things that you guys are working on that that you are meaningful that you want to talk about, discuss?
I think we hit on a lot. I mean, so where we the only thing we didn't, we have quite a bit of partners and clients that we work with. Whether we do dedicated builds and spaces, we're not looking to do the same old or LAN centers or anything like that. It is purely, like I said, to create an experience somewhere where you cannot get at home. That is truly at the heart of what we do. The one thing we didn't mention a little bit is we do work a lot with universities, and we do work with groups online that are building community in around esports and around video gaming, and we do that. We provide that as well. But again, on its heart is we partner and work with people that are not looking to do the same old stuff. And I'm not saying everything has to be new, but it should be better than. That's kind of at the heart of what it is. Whether we're working with curriculum partners, or we're working to build community for people trying to find jobs in the industry, which I'm working with a group doing that, all via online. But a lot of what we spoke about today, everything we're talking about today is not very different from any sector we're in. And then we try to bridge people into like sponsors that don't understand esports. Then we're working on the other side, kind of walking them through the front door into esports and kind of the do's and don'ts and what works and what doesn't. And then we're very agnostic towards our partnerships. We're not exclusive. So if we're a value add and someone's a value add for us in these endeavors, we go about life like that. So, some of those are very symbiotic, almost all of them. And then others look a little disparate, like, how does this make sense in esports? And usually it's bringing something creative or unique. So my little spiel on Abacus 3, but that's kind of where we're at and what we do.
Okay. No, that's great. So if our listeners are interested in connecting with you on social media and the work that you guys are doing, what's the best way for them to find you?
They can go to Abacus 3 website if they want, or if they want to even know further or connect, they can go correct with me directly. It's Mark, MRK at abacus3.gg. And they can connect to me that way. That's probably the easiest, best way. I'm pretty accessible. I kind of try to practice what I preach within reason. But if they want, they can go to our website, or they can contact me directly through my email.
Okay. Awesome.
Well, Mark, I know I speak for both of us here and, everybody at the greater TMG Corps. We really appreciate your time and are grateful that you took a lot of time out to talk with us. And, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. And I know we'll be in touch, but we're excited to see everything that you're doing at A3 and, see how things progress.
I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure and humbling to talk to you guys as well. So it's awesome. So I appreciate the time and the amount of time you gave as well. So it's all good.
Perfect. All right, cool. Well, that's going to do it for us here today on The Edge, a TMG Corps production. Don't forget to subscribe anywhere you pick up your favorite podcast and leave us a 5-star review there. You can also find us at www.theedgetmgcorps.com. So thanks so much. We'll catch you next time. And remember, The Edge will go as far as you take it. Thanks, Mark.
Take care, guys.
Drew here again. And wasn't that an awesome interview with Mark? Man, a lot of really great stuff to think about in there. Now, again, don't forget to go like, subscribe, and sign up for notifications so you don't miss out on any future content that we're dropping here on the channel. Now, I mentioned in the beginning video that I would share with you all what my favorite video game title that I play is. And candidly, I don't play a lot of video games and haven't since I started grad school and beyond. But back in high school and college, I played a lot of Madden and Tiger Woods Golf with a lot of my friends. The past few months, it's been Minecraft. While Hawk was recovering from his brain surgery, he was given a PS4 by some of the guys in my office, and one of the titles that we got him for the PS4 was Minecraft. He really loves Legos and building and creating that way, and so Minecraft was a really easy transition for him into video games. So we started playing together. He loves building and creating, harvesting things, mining things, and just developing worlds in a really cool and creative way. So he and I have been playing Minecraft together. And a teaser, we actually have a really cool project we're working on where we're going to put together a video explaining the auto technology in Minecraft. We had some really cool guys, really smart guys in the TMG Corps fam that put a couple autos together with Minecraft materials. So really cool, really excited about that. We're working on that. That should be coming out soon. So there's a real cool tie in there. So Minecraft probably is my favorite title to be playing right now, simply because it's something that Hawk's enjoying and I get to do that with him. So again, don't forget to like, subscribe, sign up for those notifications so you don't miss out on anything, and we'll check you next time. Thanks so much. Love you. Bye.